Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Hermann Pretorius. Hermann, how's it going?
It's going fine, thank you. It's good to be here. I have no banter this morning. Today, my band is gone. No banter.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult day to banter on.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm also joined by Mr. Gabriel Crouse. Gabriel, how are you, sir?
I'm okay. Very happy to be here. Happy to be with you guys.
Excellent. Well, our viewers may note there's something a little bit different about me, and our listeners may even hear something a little bit different about me, and that's because yesterday my house got hit by lightning, and as a result, I lost my computer, or at least part of it. So I'm currently working from an alternative setup, but hopefully there are no technical problems going ahead. And in fact, today we are even going to be trying a technical innovation for the first time on the Daily Show. I know we're just catching up into the modern age. We're going to attempt to incorporate some pictures into our show. It's been a long time coming, but anyway. So let's get into our first story. There was a curious little dust-up yesterday in our local politics between ActionSA and the other members of the coalition government in Tshwane. I believe that is the DA and the Freedom Front Plus. And COPE, I think, has
and the ACDP.
Oh, and the ACDP. Yes. Oh, sorry, I've forgotten. All these coalitions of so many parties. Anyway, just as the budget seemed like the adjustment budget, so every municipal council is now able to adjust its budget by sort of 10% or so. So this is the first sort of time that the opposition governments are being able to actually affect the way that the money is being spent, to a limited degree, but to a little bit. And ActionSA, well, let me just show you the graphic. ActionSA declared in a media statement that they will vote against the Tshwane adjustment budget, potentially collapsing the coalition government there. Now, what's quite shocking about this is that this is generally thought to be the most stable of the coalitions. Of course, Tshwane is the province with, the city with no EFF, PA, or IFP involved in the coalition. And yet, within hours, that decision had been reversed, and ActionSA voted with the Tshwane adjustment budget, and it was passed unanimously without any, or by all the opposition without any, by all the government without any problems. Very weird. Gabriel, what exactly is going on here?
Look, it's hard to know for sure. I just for the viewers' pleasure, let's note, or for your interest, that both of those statements were from the 28th of February. The date is a little bit faint, but they were released, within a couple of hours of one another, within a few hours of one another. This exact U-turn was a problem. I saw some coverage of this. There was, one of the questions was, did anything really change in the budget between those two statements? As far as I can tell, the answer is really pretty much no. There might have been a tiny sort of nominal allowance for something, but there really was no substantial change. And the bigger issue was that an ActionSA had been asked questions about this on TV before it had changed its tune. They'd said, why are you guys opposing this budget? Because you approved the budget within caucus.
Right. And this was the accusation leveled by the DA in public, as they said, you guys had an opportunity to bring up this issue beforehand. Why are you only bringing it up now?
Right. And I'm not even sure if it was only the DA. There might have been other wild dog parties involved in sort of trying to check that ActionSA was being a spoiler. But the answer that was being given was, what's the gibberish? I think that's the word. At least to my ear, I couldn't understand it.
I think the tweet from ActionSA read something along the lines of, it doesn't matter when we raise this issue, it's an important issue.
So it's not very transparent. Now, the good news is that they passed the budget. So the bad news is if they hadn't passed that budget, it would have been the first step towards collapsing the government. And it's not. It's basically just another step, and then the government's collapsed. The good news is that didn't happen. The adjusted budget has been passed, and as far as I can tell, it's the budget that was basically agreed to by all the wild dog parties, who at this stage seem to have a better understanding of how to serve citizens' interests than the those from whom they have recently taken over power. Let's hope it works out that way. Here's an allegation that I'm going to mention to you that I'm currently investigating. And I want to flag that I haven't gotten both sides of the story yet. But my understanding is that Floyd Brink has been an important part of this back and forth, or at least of coalition opposition politics in the last little while. Now, Floyd Brink probably does not ring a bell, but he is an important chap. He took over from Jeff Makubo as the de facto mayor of Johannesburg because he had been the COO of Johannesburg during the ANC's tenure. He has been involved in Joburg administrative politics for a while, but really first came to prominence when he was arrested by the Hawks under allegations of major corruption in Limpopo, which connected or implicated a connection between him and then ANC Youth League leader Julius Malema. So there are two sides to this. The one side says that there was prima facie evidence of major league corruption involving the EFF, what would come to be the EFF, and there's another side says, well, charges were dropped, and then the first side says, well, that's because dockets of evidence disappeared, not because of a sort of satisfactory exculpation. Now, I don't know enough to say one way or another. Clearly, it is the case that that Floyd Brink was an attractive collaborator with the ANC, because when they were in charge of Joburg, they were happy to keep him in power there as the chief operations officer. And the allegation here is that within the Joburg metropole, there is the need to ratify the new municipal manager. Am I saying that right?
I think so.
Nick, the municipal, yes, which is a very important position. I've been told next to God, it's just about the most important thing in any city, and that's because it sort of incorporates an executive and a CFO and a CEO kind of set of roles, or sorry, chief of staff and chief financial officer kind of set of roles. So it's a very important position. And the allegation here is that ActionSA wanted Floyd Brink to be the municipal manager, and that the rest of the Wild Dogs did not want that because they said this guy is associated with the ANC and he's associated with the EFF. And we believe we've got enough reason to suspect him of corruption to not want him to get the job. And we believe that we've got a much better candidate in the form of one Mr. Johan Metla. As it happens, this is one of the nice stories where race politics do not enter into it because both gentlemen are colored. So no one can say that there's any preferencing about that. Sorry that I'm going on so long, but the point is, the allegation is that there was a bit of horse trading going on. Like, no, we'll pass this budget, but we would like Floyd Brink to be Joburg's municipal manager. And then people saying, well, we can't let that happen because that would be very, very risky in terms of guarding Johannesburg's fiscus. So, as I say, unconfirmed, still being investigated. But that's an allegation that I take to be very distressing. And we look forward to sort of covering more of that on the Daily Friend.
Right. Just to be clear, I don't think I clearly spelled out what the official reason that ActionSA gave to, as for why it was opposed to the budget and then not opposed to the budget. It said that not enough money had been given to the Hammanskraal community to solve the water crisis there. That was the allegation, and as Gabriel said, it doesn't look like the final budget had any kind of significant adjustment to address that concern. So it's not clear why, if that was the reason, they then supported the budget. Hermann, your thoughts on this strange coincidence and the allegations that Gabriel's just laid out?
Yeah, I think there's a pattern of behavior here emerging from before the elections, but just let's take the elections last year as sort of the period of time up to now that we're considering. There's clearly some incredibly bad blood between ActionSA and the DEA, and I mean that's to be expected. You've got Hermann Mashaba, who was leader of the DA in Johannesburg and the mayor there and so on. But something that is starting to become rather clear is that ActionSA has an immense challenge in resisting temptation to politically one-up the DA. And the bizarre facts on the table are as follows: that this adjustment budget was discussed and agreed to by all the coalition parties in Tshwane. And while the appropriate members of ActionSA sat in on these discussions, they did not make the claims for, or they did not make the arguments for these adjustments to be made during the discussions before it was scheduled for a vote in the municipal council. And then once it was scheduled for a vote, then they came out and said, we have a political problem, or we have problems with this, not enough money allocated to this, not enough, the idea of relocating people within flood regions in Mamelodi, I think that's cruel. And then the DA were quite miffed, and I spoke to other people of other smaller parties, and they were quite miffed about this as well, because there was ample opportunity for ActionSA to actually make these arguments during the budget discussions of the coalition government. So either the ActionSA members that participated in these discussions were told not to participate so that there could be some scope for political grandstanding to boost ActionSA's quote-unquote pro-poor PR objective. That's something that goes back to Hermann Mashaba's days as mayor. Or ActionSA simply did not have a position at the time of the discussions, but then adopted a position after the discussions were completed. Now, all of this is a bit of a storm in a very, very silly teacup, because the budget was passed. And ActionSA, with that second press release, associated themselves proudly with the passing of the budget. Why in heaven expend political capital that on a national level might be negligible, but when you're in the early days of a ruckus coalition environment, you don't spend unnecessary political capital for no reason while weakening relationships of trust in this government? This is a serious matter. It's not just a serious matter for the city of Tshwane in terms of its governance. And we spoke about this before, Nick, on the show, is that Tshwane is at this stage the best shot the Wild Dogs have at a proof of concept going into 2024. A government that can find common ground on the center and perhaps the center right and position itself as a new viable option for provincial and national government. Ekurhuleni and Johannesburg are not good examples, because even the coalition governments are minority governments to quite a significant extent. In Pretoria and Tshwane, there's the only coalition government of the Wild Dog parties that actually has a good shot at sustaining its majority, or its de facto majority, which means it's very close to 50%. And seeing as council attendance isn't 100% always, it will always likely have something close to a majority of quorum. So Tshwane is in a unique position as the sales point, as the flagship coalition project for parties that we call the Wild Dogs, the DA, ACDP, Cove, Freedom Front Plus, ActionSA, to show that if you are serious about getting rid of the ANC on a national level, we are building that blueprint in Tshwane. ActionSA doing silly things like this, they might have proper reasons, but they are in a very, very dangerous way toxifying or discrediting the idea of coalition governance as a viable, stable form of government. That's a very, very irresponsible thing to do. And if ActionSA, like Hermann Mashaba has repeatedly claimed, are in politics to kick out the ANC, then they should behave that way. And this is destructive. Whatever their reasons were, their handling of the process damaged their ability to put trust in coalition partners and coalition politics. And that's quite sad.
Still, at the end of the day, crisis was avoided. So hopefully lessons learned.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the good news is that crisis was averted in this case. And I think that the proof of concept thing it's so important. It really is very important that South Africa gets a real opportunity to think about different options for who gets to occupy the union buildings, who gets to really run the country from 2024. I think we all want coalition politics to succeed, insofar as that it brings out that broader choice for South Africa to be a robust democracy. At some point, it's got to get to the phase where it doesn't just always have one party that's in charge, where you've got a peaceful transfer of power at the very highest level. I think that everything that gets us towards that robust democracy is very important. And maybe if lessons get learned, we'll have time to see where this goes. And as I said about the earlier allegations, they're very distressing. But we will certainly be coming back to you with further news on that front.
Indeed. All right, let's move on to another story. And in a strange turn of events, and I think perhaps this suggests something about how the country is changing, we don't really have to talk too much about the ANC today, because our second story is also about the DA. At least, the previous one's partly about the DA. This one's entirely about the DA. So MEC in the Western Cape, Albert Fritz, was accused by a number of people of sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, and I think even sexual assault or something along those lines. Very serious allegations. The DA suspended him as MEC and appointed an advocate to investigate the claims. Advocate Jennifer Williams has just submitted her report to Western Cape Premier Alan Winde, or at least she did on Sunday, and found that the allegations against Albert Fritz are credible, in her words, that he had been engaged in sexual misconduct, alcohol abuse, and grooming, and that he had simply denied these allegations, resorted to victim blaming, and claimed there was a plot against him by his enemies in the DA. Despite some of the evidence that Advocate Williams says was collected against him. So Alan Winde has fired Albert Fritz, and Helen Ziller has said that Albert Fritz has 24 hours to give the DA good reason why not to suspend him from the party, which would effectively mean the end of his time in the DA in any kind of politics. Presumably, I think the next step would be removing him completely from the party. So, pretty big scandal. I think it's one of the biggest ones that the Western Cape government has had since the DA has been running it. Hermann, what do you make of this? How well have they handled it? What do you think this will mean for the DA in the Western Cape politically?
Well, it seems like they've handled it as well as they possibly could. The moment, as far as I'm aware, now the difficulty here is predatory. Predatory politicians and quite often do this over many, many years, and have victims of varying degrees of success due to circumstances and whatever the behavior of the person in question, their feeling of entitlement. So I don't know how far this goes back, but it is good that the DA acted swiftly. At the moment these allegations, as far as I'm aware, came to light for Premier Winde, he took the steps that you have outlined, first on leave and then immediately launching an investigation. I think there's not, for me, there isn't much political analysis here, because I don't think this is a political problem. I genuinely think that politics being the province of power dealing and power sharing, you will always have those who seek to abuse their positions. And as far as it is a political situation, the DA deserves credit for handling this, at least over the last few weeks, in the way that it has. But something that it does make clear is that the standard of politics or politicians is really something that we shouldn't be complacent about. We shouldn't think that the DA, because it has a better track record in government, is something of a moral beacon beyond what they do in government. And 2 points I want to make about this is: be careful of buying into political parties for personalities, because personalities fall quite dramatically when they do. And the other point is that I think it must be incredibly tough to be a woman in South African politics, and I don't mean to make a feminist or whatever or woke point. It's just I think it must be tough when there are patriarchal elements to our society. A part of many South African communities with varying forms of benevolence or malevolence, but clearly being a woman in politics is a dangerous thing because the people who spoke out against this politician, Mr. Fritz, there was a real risk of them destroying their careers by going up and taking a stand against a very powerful man. So I'm just glad that there was some justice served here, and hopefully some further investigations of perhaps a criminal kind, if the victims desire it, can follow from this. But beyond that, I don't have much to say.
Gabriel, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there is still an open question about the DA's performance here, insofar as these kinds of things, as Hermann was saying, often there is a long track record. And then there's the question of has there been an earlier pattern of cover-up and then only now expose? And then it's like, okay, well, once the expose happened, good behavior insofar as
and there was some accusations at the beginning of the scandal that some of the officials around Mr. Fritz had done exactly that.
Yeah. So I don't know the answer to that question. I think we need to, I think we as South Africans kind of need to know the answer to that question because this is important, but especially constituents in the Western Cape. And yeah, I think criminal procedures seem appropriate. I'm not sure where the NPA is on this. I think that there's something heavy about it and very serious about it, and this too requires further investigation insofar as criminal standards of reasonable doubt and so on haven't been crossed. I'm also reluctant to
this is not a court finding
to get on a moral, whip out my moral pitchfork and go stab Mr. Fritz. These allegations seem serious enough that he deserves his day in court, grisly as that might be. So yeah, I think the bottom line is it does look like the system, as it were, is working here, but it's not clear how much work it still has left to do. What is clear is that it still has some work to do.
Right. All right. Let us move from heavy things at home to heavy things abroad. For the latest on the war in Ukraine, there are ongoing peace negotiations of a sort along the Belarusian-Ukrainian border between the Ukrainian government and the Russian Federation. There are also all sorts of rumors circulating today that the Belarusian army is going to join in the invasion. There's not clear evidence of that yet, but the allegation is being made by some in the Ukrainian camp. Further to that, the Russians isolated the city of Mariupol, I think yesterday sometime, and they are currently isolating the city of Kherson in the south of Ukraine. And there is a column of approximately 2,300 Russian vehicles north of Kiev, which appear poised to launch a very, very, very large assault on the city, although it's not clear whether they have actually surrounded the city or not yet. So the military confrontation is definitely heating up. We've also seen a lot of footage coming out in the past 24 hours of what seems to be an increasing use of artillery against the cities of Ukraine, particularly in Kharkiv in the east, where there was footage of lots of shelling and missile strikes. There was a missile strike, I think, on the Kharkiv municipal governance building today, although it hit the parking lot just outside. Gabriel, do you think we might be seeing perhaps an escalation in the level of destruction that's going on there?
It does look like it. It's hard to evaluate. The fog of war is thick. The propaganda coming from both sides is or the news coming from both sides is, to my eye, is becoming increasingly difficult to extract from the spin. Certainly from in Russian language media, from Saturday, there were lots of reports about sort of rocket shells, mortar shells, like relatively imprecise missile weapons being used.
Yeah, mobile rocket launcher things which don't have a targeting system. They just sort of fire in a direction.
Being used in the sort of corridor between Crimea and the southern part of the Donbass, the sort of two Russian-controlled zones. As the Russians have been impinging on the pushback, there have been these allegations. I'm not sure what to believe. Certainly, allegations like that increasing from Kharkiv and Kiev, Ukrainian-held towns, where the allegation is the other way, namely that the Russians are bombarding them. I think that the civilian casualty number is so far still in the hundreds. To give a sense of context, we're on day 6 or 7 here.
Right, day 6.
So there was the famous sort of 6-day war. The Israelis showed that something very profound militarily can be achieved in 6 days, but usually not. The American invasion of Iraq, which has been sort of like a gold standard of a really bad war, in my opinion, a really sort of illegal, inhuman war in the last 20 years, that it took the Americans 3 weeks to take Baghdad. And, you know, the lowest body count that you can find is in the 7,000s, 8,000s. Estimates also seem to be in the 12,000s of civilians, not soldiers. So if you think of that as a kind of an actual recent case of like very asymmetric powers and confronting each other, I think this could continue to get much worse. I think it's likely to continue to get much worse. I think it's likely to be the case that there is much worse civilian deaths, particularly in Ukraine, particularly at the hands of Russia's forces. And partly that's going to be, partly it's going to be because Ukrainian civilians have been armed with automatic weapons, and who knows what's happening with the distribution of Stinger missiles and Javelin anti-tank missiles. But if those are being housed in apartment buildings and so on, Russians will feel like they have an excuse to shoot more indiscriminately. But also, just as these things progress, it gets less and less human.
Right.
And so,
there's also been
it'd be great if peace talks come to a good conclusion, but I don't see any reason for the Ukrainian president to offer anything. I think all the political cards are in his favor in terms of global support, domestic support, and every casualty just increases Zelensky's prestige versus the Russians, who have all the military advantage, but no way to translate that at the negotiating table either. So I think it's just going to turn into a nasty guerrilla war.
Hermann, very briefly, your thoughts.
Yeah, I can't really add to the military analysis of the situation. One thing that I do want to put on the table for viewers to consider is that the escalation of this is on more than one front. We have now essentially a full-scale financial war going as well between some sovereign nations. That's some really hectic risks going on there. The dollar has been the settlement currency of the world for 100 years, or at least 50, and there's the politicization or the geopoliticization of the dollar is a real sort of turning point in global finances, where the dollar is now a weapon for the West and for NATO to use. And I'm not commenting on the merit of using it, but its capacity as a weaponable thing, or something that can be weaponized, now changes the calculus for China and Russia and perhaps anti-American nations who want to move away from the dollar as settler currency or settlement currency, and that will have negative consequences for the American economy and for trade around the world. So escalation on a political front is very important, but if you're looking for the real risk to global escalation, it's the financial war that has broken out quite ugly.
Indeed. I think everyone who's living through this right now will remember this as a key moment in history. I didn't think we'd have, at least for a couple of years, anything to match the pandemic in terms of disruption to people's lives. But I have a feeling that this might well do it. But we shall have to see. It's still very early days yet. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today on the show. So thank you very much for listening. Please support the Institute of Race Relations by SMSing your name to 32823. And please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, or leave us good reviews on the podcast apps. Anyway, thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.